I have no upper body strength or lower body strength or any body strength. Hello friends, welcome back to my channel Patronosaurus Reads. I'm Katie, aka Patronosaurus, and I read. Today I'm bringing you all of the books that I read in February, March, and April. If you were unaware, I kind of took a hiatus from BookTube for a month or two, however long it was. Honestly, I don't even know. Time isn't real anymore. But I was still sort of reading during that time. You'll see that my numbers fluctuated greatly, but I still wanted to tell you guys about all the books that I read. So I'm gonna give them all to you. I'm gonna go in order from month to month, just like I normally would in a single video, except this time it's gonna be all 3 months at once. So I anticipate this being kind of a long video. Grab a snack, grab a drink, settle in. Let's talk about some books. Okay, so in February I read 14 books for a total of 3,143 pages and 39 hours of audiobook listened to. And the way I track my audiobook hours is always by how long the audiobook is in hours, not how many hours I actually listened, because I do fluctuate the speeds. Usually I listen at double time, but sometimes it's more than that, sometimes it's less. It just depends. So I didn't listen to 39 actual human hours of books, but that's like the equivalent of that amount of hours that the audiobooks are, if that makes sense. Okay, anyways. And my average rating was a 3.5, so like basically the most average of average ratings is what I had in February. I didn't have any 1-star books, which is awesome, but I did have one 2-star book, which is Homegoing by Yaa Gyasi. I was sort of like low-key doing Blackathon, but I didn't really want to commit to 100% like doing prompts and things, so I did try to focus more of my reading on Black authors, but I didn't like fully like participate, I guess. So this is one of the books that I read for Blackathon, and I didn't love it. This book was definitely making the rounds on BookTube around the time that I started watching. It's a like generational narrative that starts with 2 sisters, they're half-sisters, in Africa, and one of them is taken and becomes a slave in America, and the other one stays in Africa. And then each chapter alternates between one of their descendants. And I should have known this book wouldn't work for me, but I really wanted it to work because it sounds so interesting. But the combination of historical fiction plus each chapter being about different people, and you never really get to stick with someone long enough that their story really makes an impact. Like those things combined, this was just not really my cup of tea. It's also very literary fiction-y, which is also not my thing. So I was trying to branch out and try new things that I would enjoy, but unfortunately this book just really wasn't the kind of book for me. If that's the kind of story that you find yourself drawn to, this generational historical narrative, definitely pick this up because I could see what the author was trying to do and I saw that she did it very well. It just, personally, for my personal enjoyment, wasn't great. Then I had 7 3-star books in February, so half of the books that I read in February were 3 stars, which is not great, but not terrible. That's probably what caused that extremely average 3.5 rating. So I'm going to talk about these first 2 books together, which are Shadowland and Ninth Key by Meg Cabot. They are the first 2 books in the Mediator series. I remember reading these in elementary school, which is maybe a little young to be reading these books because they talk about sex a lot. It's not like graphic, but there's a lot of jokes that like 10-year-old me did not understand. But I remember this being my favorite of Meg Cabot's series. So this book series follows a girl named Suze who is a mediator, which means that she can see ghosts and she helps them get to the other side. The whole series starts out with her moving from New York City to California to live with her mom and her new stepdad and her new stepbrothers. And their house is super old and there's a ghost who lives in her bedroom. And so this series kind of follows her adventures trying to get rid of the ghosts that she encounters in her daily life and the different things that happen. I didn't love it as much as I did when I was a kid, which is probably not surprising. Obviously 3 stars, like it was still fine. But I don't think this series is like anything crazy. It's fine. It was a good time. My next 3-star read was A Princess in Theory by Alyssa Cole. This is a romance book about a woman who is a long lost princess, essentially, of this fake African country that reminded me a lot of Wakanda from the Marvel Cinematic Universe, like the way that they talked about their economy and technology and stuff. I was like, oh, this is kind of like romance book Wakanda. Okay, cool. And she, when she was very, very little, was engaged to be married to the prince, and then her parents took her to America, and they were all never seen again. But eventually the prince tracks her down, and she doesn't even know that she's a princess. And it's quite fun. Cases of mistaken identity galore. A hint of conspiracy. It was really cute. I don't think the pacing of the story was quite for me. It got to the point where I, as the reader, knew everything because you got stuff from the guys and the girls' perspective. So I knew everything that was happening, but I knew that they were both like keeping secrets from each other, and it was very frustrating for me as a reader. I know that's what adds tension to romance books, but I was like, please just talk to each other. Please communicate. Please. The next 3-star book I read was The Queen of Dauphine Street by Thea DeSalle. This is the second book in the, what is it called? The Nola Nights series, I think is what it is. I remember reading the first one on Chelsea Dalling's recommendation because basically all of my romance suggestions come from her. She doesn't know it because she doesn't know that I exist. But basically, if she talks about a romance book and she likes it, I'm like, okay, I want to read that. So this continues following some side characters from the first book as they're doing some like sexy New Orleans things. I don't even really remember. I completely forgot I read this book until I was prepping for this video, so I guess that shows you the impact it had on me. It was fine. There were a lot of overly dramatic things, which I kind of hate in romance books, like romance/erotica, because this is one of those books that's sort of like in between romance and smut, and I was like, just pick one. Either be a romance book or be smut. Because this like very dramatic, like daytime soap opera bullshit is not enjoyable to me. So it was fine. I think there's a third book in the series. I'm not sure if I want to read it or if I'm just gonna call it quits. I'm not totally sure. The next 3-star book I read was, even the title makes me laugh. It is called Kidnap and Kink by Bryn Paulin. It's this like very short smutty book about this girl who is having a conversation with her friend in a coffee shop of all places. Why, I don't know. Where she's talking about she has this like kidnapping fantasy, and then this guy who is also at the coffee shop overhears her and decides to make it come true. So it starts off non-consensual, but then he does give her an out. And he's like, you know, you say the word and we're done. So then it was consensual. And I'm kind of like exploring where the line is in these more like taboo romances and smutty books of like how far is too far for me. And I think this book was like right at that line. I'm not sure. This is another book that I did forget that I read until I was getting ready for this video, but it was fine. It was like a fun time. So if that's something you feel you can handle and it's not gonna trigger you, then by all means, have fun. But I understand that it's something that is not everybody's cup of tea. The next 3-star book I read was If It Makes You Happy by Claire Kahn. If It Makes You Happy is Claire Kahn's second book. I read her first one and I liked it fine. I think I gave that one 3 stars as well, maybe 4 stars. And this one also delves into some interesting queer relationships that aren't explored a lot in young adult literature. So her first book was about an asexual main character, and this book follows a main character who is in a queer platonic relationship with her best friend. So basically they decided to be life partners, but they're not in a sexual or romantic relationship at all. And then the main character also starts to develop feelings for this guy. Oh, well, and they're like this cute summery town where they do summery festivals that felt very much like Stars Hollow from Gilmore Girls. If you have watched that show, then like you understand the vibe that I'm talking about. And also some family drama. And to me, adding in that family drama just made this book too much. Claire Kahn was just trying to do too much and say too much in way too short a time span. So that's why it was 3 stars. I think if she had decided on the relationship things or the family things, it would have made a lot more sense. But it just felt very jumbled, and it was like too slice of life for me, where at the end it felt like there wasn't a lot resolved, and I was like, okay, what was the point of me reading this? All right. But I really loved that she was bringing up all that diversity. The main character is plus size as well, and they talk about that too, and I really like that. So there's a lot of good stuff in Claire Kahn's books. It just didn't quite hit the mark for me. The last 3-star book that I read in February was Love Her or Lose Her by Tessa Bailey. It's the second book in whatever that series is. I can't even remember the name of the first book, but this book follows Rosie, and her husband, Dominic. It follows them. So they're already married, but they've been having some relationship issues. And it follows them as they try to work that out and figure out where their communication problems are and all these things. But to me, it felt like it dragged on too long, which is why it was 3 stars, because it got to the point where I was like, okay, you both have acknowledged like what the problem is, and you're still not actually fixing the problem. And that just kind of bothered me. I still really enjoy Tessa Bailey's writings. The steamy scenes were indeed quite steamy. I do have an arc of the 3rd book, which I'm like super excited about, so I will be reading that. I still like the series, but this was not my favorite installment in it. Moving on into my 4-star reads, I had 4 of them, 4 stars. That's fun. The first of which was We're Going to Need More Wine by Gabrielle Union. It was her memoir. And I'm not a huge fan of Gabrielle Union. Like, I'm sure there are people there that already knew her whole life story and have been huge fans of her for a really long time, and I'm not that way. I know her as the girl that was in Bring It On and 10 Things I Hate About You and a couple of other things, but I've never been a huge fan of her. But, you know, I wanted to not only be reading fiction during Blackathon, I also wanted to, you know, branch out a little bit and try some different genres, so I decided to read her memoir. I listened to the audiobook, as I usually do with celebrity memoirs, and I really enjoyed it. I learned so much about her life and where she comes from and how she has been fighting racism her whole life and like all these different things. I was like, dang, she's cool. So even if you don't really know anything about Gabrielle Union, like I knew nothing about her personal life, I would highly recommend checking out this book. It was really good. I really loved listening to it. Her voice is very nice, just very soothing to listen to. So if you're interested in her life story at all, go ahead and pick up this book. My next 4-star read was Children of Blood and Bone by Tomi Adeyemi. This was a reread. I listened to the audiobook of this as well. If you don't know what this is about, then you probably were not on BookTube a year or 2 ago when this book was exploding. It is a West African-inspired fantasy, also heavily inspired by Avatar: The Last Airbender, so it's like a lot of things that I like. It's a diverse fantasy. It's Avatar-ish. Super fun. When I read it the first time, I gave it 5 stars. This time on a reread, I actually really noticed all those flaws that a lot of people talked about, particularly in the weird insta-love and flip-flopping of character motivations, and I was like, yeah, I don't like that as much. So I did bump my rating down to 4 stars. I do still really like this book. I'm not sure if I'm gonna continue on with the series. I do kind of want to, just so I can like have the closure, but I don't know how long this series is gonna be. I don't know if I want to commit to it. I really like Tomi Adeyemi's writing. I really love the world that she's built, but the characters leave a little bit to be desired, not gonna lie. My next 4-star read was Long Way Down by Jason Reynolds. I also listened to this audiobook, which is narrated by the author. It is a book written in verse about a boy who is planning to shoot someone, and he's in the elevator in his building, and on each floor someone else comes into the elevator and talks to him about gun violence, basically. It was very moving. It was so good. It was so good. Very difficult to listen to. It's also an incredibly short audiobook, which is not surprising. So if you have, an hour or two to spare, I would highly recommend getting the audiobook from your local library, from Libby, and just sitting there and listening to it and soaking up the story, because it was really phenomenal. And my final 4-star read was The Revolution of Bertie Randolph by Brandy Colbert. I loved this book so much. It was so good. It was just like this summery contemporary about this girl named Bertie Randolph and different things that are developing in her life. She's seeing a boy and she's starting to come to terms with herself and growing up a little bit. I think it's the summer before her senior year, if I'm correct. I don't remember. But she's getting older. She is feeling a little bit stifled by all of the limitations her overprotective mother is putting on her. Her aunt that she hasn't seen in a really long time comes back into her life. All these things are kind of happening in this like big transitional summer, and it's just a beautiful coming of age story. I really, really loved it. I highly recommend you read it. I actually bought another Brandy Colbert book and included it in my haul, which was my last video. And I had to cut out a bunch of stuff that I said when I was talking about Bertie Randolph, because I assumed that this video, my February wrap-up, would go up way before that haul, and then I took a hiatus, so it didn't. So I had to cut a bunch of stuff out, but now I'm super excited that I can gush properly about how good this book was. I highly recommend you check it out. It was so good. Now moving on to my 5-star reads. There were 2 of them, the first of which was On the Come Up by Angie Thomas. This is another reread and another book that I listened to on audio, which was really fun because it's a book about a girl who wants to be a rapper. And so it has a lot of her music in it and her rapping, and it was very good. Just as good as I remember. 5 stars. Like, Angie Thomas is so good at really hitting these difficult issues hard and getting to the core of so many problems that exist in modern America, and making things very concise and making the characters real and making you feel for them. And she's so talented. This book is so good. If you haven't read it, highly recommend. And my final 5-star read of February was The Starless Sea by Erin Morgenstern. I read this as part of the Half-Blood book club. They invited me to be in their live show for February, so I will try to link that down below if I remember. We read The Starless Sea. Well, some of us did. Some people DNF'd it, and some people read it and absolutely loved it, and there was no in between. If you finished it, you loved it, and if you didn't love it, you didn't even bother finishing it. But I loved it. This is a book about books and book lovers for book lovers. There's a part pretty close to the beginning where the main character goes to this like literary themed ball, and everyone is dressed up as book characters, and it's not just classic characters like you would expect, like a lot of Jay Gatsby's and stuff like that. But you can tell that Erin Morgenstern is like a book person, because there were people dressed up as, I'm never gonna find it. I'm not gonna find it. There are people dressed up as a lot of modern characters. Like someone had a keyhole painted on the back of their neck, which is a pretty obvious reference to Lock and Key, the comic book series by Joe Hill, which is now a Netflix show, which I haven't watched yet because I haven't finished reading Lock and Key. But stuff like that, like you can tell Erin Morgenstern is not just like, yes, only the classics. Like, no, she's like us. One of us. Erin Morgenstern is one of us. And you can tell, and it's beautiful, and I love this book so much. It's not a book for everyone. It is confusing, and that's just like part of the Erin Morgenstern brand, I think. But I absolutely loved it. If anyone knows where I can get my hands on a UK copy, because I also really love that cover, I would be eternally in your debt. If you have one and you want to send it to me, like, let me know. I really love it. At least try this book. I think this is the kind of book that every book lover should at least attempt to read, because it's that good. All right, that's all the books that I read in February. Moving on into my March books. I only read 5 books in March, and they were all within the first like week and a half or so, and then I didn't finish another book until about a week and a half into April. So I did take a month break from reading. My brain just couldn't handle it. I was not feeling great. I was very stressed. I'm feeling good now. So let's talk about my March books. I read 1,448 pages and listened to 11.75 hours, roughly. I usually round because otherwise it would get crazy. And my average rating was a 3.7. Nothing I read was under a 3-star, which is pretty good. You know, only 5 books, but that's pretty good. So the majority of my books were 3 stars. I read 3 3-star books. The first of which was From Twinkle with Love by Sandhya Menon, which is another book in like this When Dimple Met Rishi universe. Honestly, I don't really remember what happened, which is not unusual for me reading contemporary romances. So the main character is Twinkle. Obviously, her name is in the title of the book. And she wants to be a filmmaker. So there's this like big arts showcase type thing at her school. And so she wants to submit a film. And this guy offers to be her producer. So his twin brother is the guy that Twinkle's had a crush on for a really long time. And then the one that's going to be a producer is like kind of a nerd and not someone that Twinkle's ever really been interested in. But as they work together and she learns more about him, she's like, oh, he's not that bad. And she has a secret admirer. So it has like all these different elements of Twinkle's heart being pulled all these different directions. It was very fun, very cute. I really like Sandhya Menon's work. I have read almost all her books. All her books? I don't know if I've read every single one, but I think I've read most of them. And I think that they're just really fun and easy to read, and I don't know, they're just a good time. The next 3-star book I read was Reunion, which is book number 3 in the Mediator series by Meg Cabot. I continued on with this series because they're all on script and they're super easy to get. So this continues on in the story of Sue's being a mediator, trying to help ghosts find the other side. I remember this one having like a twist ending. And then when I reread it, I was like, oh no, it was very obvious what was going to happen. But, you know, that's what happens when you read books when you're young and then you reread them when you're older and you're like, oh, okay. Again, just like a fun book. Nothing too crazy, just a good time. And my next 3-star read was Wicked Fox by Kat Cho. This book, I didn't know how to rate it at first because there were a lot of parts, especially towards the beginning. For quite a while, it seemed a strong contender for a 4 or even 5-star, and then the book basically just like stopped in the middle and nothing happened for a really long time. The pacing just like ground to a halt, and I was like, oh, are we okay? So if you don't know what this book is about, this book was also making the BookTube rounds when it came out a little while ago. It is about a gumiho, which is a Korean fox spirit demon thing. So the main character is a gumiho, and she accidentally loses her bead, which is like what gives her life. And a boy at her school was like there, like she saves his life or something. And then they kind of form this relationship where he's really nice, which she doesn't really expect from boys or men. And it was really cute the way that their relationship progressed, again, until everything just stopped. I thought it would be a lot more action-packed and a lot more magical, and then everything ground to a halt and they like just focused on the relationship piece. And I was like, I would like a little bit more balance with this, which is why it was 3 stars. But I think I will continue on with the series when the second book comes out because it is a very interesting mythology and very interesting universe. And it did it leave off on a cliffhanger? Actually, I don't remember, but I want to keep reading it. And then I had one 4-star book in March, which was Sorcery of Thorns by Margaret Rogerson. This is my Alcrate edition. I love it because it's purple, and I also love it because I like the book a lot. This is another book kind of for book lovers, books about books, which is my jam. And it follows this girl, Elizabeth, who grew up in this magical library. And there's all kinds of magic, actually. And someone attacks the library, and she's framed for it. So then she has to like go to the capital of their country and try to make her case. And librarians and magicians have never gotten along because magicians like try to channel the magic of the books for evil, I guess. And she makes friends with a magician and has to like confront her prejudices and stuff. and it was so good. I love the magic system. I love the conspiracy. I love that it's a standalone fantasy. I don't have to wait for another book. The whole story is just told right here in this one book, and it's all here, and it's delightful. I highly recommend reading it. I have given both of Margaret Rogerson's books 4 stars, so I consider myself officially now a fan of her work. I think whatever she comes out with will be really fun and interesting and imaginative and well written, which is also always important. And I just really had a good time. So I recommend this one as well. And then my final book of March was a 5-star read, which was Get a Life, Chloe Brown. It's like the perfect romance book. It's so cute. It is about this woman named Chloe Brown who has a chronic illness that causes her a lot of pain. And she's tired of her family like bothering her and babying her, so she moves out. She gets an apartment, she moves out, and the super in her building does not get along with her. So it's kind of like an enemies / rivals to lovers type story. Both of them have some emotional baggage that is dealt with really nicely, and the pacing was really good. Like, it didn't feel like it moved too quick or too slow, and the way that they talk with each other, the banter, friends, the banter is so good. So Chloe and Red together forever. I love them. I love this book. I am so excited to read the next book in the series, which is about Chloe's sister, Dani. I think it's called Take a Hint, Dani Brown. And that also sounds very good. I think that's like a fake dating trope book. It was so good. If you like romance books, you should read this book because it was excellent. And now moving on into my April books. I read 9 books in April. So you see I took kind of a dip in March and then I came back up in April. I read 9 books. I read 1,904 pages and listened to 8 hours of an audiobook. I think it was only one audiobook. And my average rating was a 3.3. So it did go down because I had a 1-star read. So let's talk about that. It's called Drive by Courtney McGuire. It was about this guy, also named Red. Interesting. Who lives in a very small town, I think in Texas, where everyone is super homophobic and he's deeply closeted. No one knows that he's gay until one day he meets this businessman who introduces him to this, the sexy times and kinky sexy times. And I really didn't like it, the way that consent was approached, because it was sort of presented like everything was consensual, but it wasn't. Like, from what we saw on the page, they never really talked about what was going to happen. This guy that Red meets knows a lot about these like power dynamic relationships and a lot of like the sexy stuff that they want to do. And he uses that knowledge as power to like pressure Red into doing things without fully explaining like what things are. And I was just very uncomfy with it. And I said that in my review, and someone else on Goodreads just was like, you should have read the trigger warnings if you weren't gonna like it. And like, I did read the trigger warnings. And actually a lot of things brought up in the trigger warnings, which is very similar to the tags on AO3 is how I like to think of it. So sometimes trigger warnings can also let you know if there's something that you are interested in while reading a book. And when I looked at them, I was like, oh, okay, a lot of these are things that I have read before in books or am interested in reading about it. And I was not triggered by anything that happened in the book. I just didn't like the way that the author handled those topics. So it's 1 star, not an enjoyable reading experience. And whoever commented on my Goodreads, like, sorry you're mad that I didn't like a book, even though that doesn't affect you as a person at all. Moving on into my 2-star reads, which I only had 1. It was A Taste of Sage by Yafa S. Santos. It was an arc that I actually read before the release. It's this romance book. I thought it was going to be very cute. It's about this chef named Lumi who opens her own restaurant, and it's everything she ever dreamed, and then it goes under and she needs to find another job. So she becomes a sous chef for this other like very famous chef at this fancy French restaurant, and he does everything like very by the book, very strict rules, and Lumi likes to experiment a lot, so they kind of butt heads. So I thought it was going to be an awesome like kind of enemies to lovers type thing. And it wasn't really. They didn't butt heads as much as I thought they would, given the summary of the book. They don't really fight that much. And it seems like very quickly, like right off the bat, the guy, what's his name? Julian. The guy's name is Julian. Right off the bat, Julian is like, oh yeah, gotta give me some of that. Love Lumi. And I'm like, what? Like, I saw no reason for them to like each other. The chemistry was not there at all. And I was really disappointed because I was sure going into it, this was going to be a 5-star romance. It was going to be like Get a Life, Chloe Brown type of awesomeness. And it was not. And I'm so sad that it was 2 stars, but it was just not good. One thing that was really cool about it was they included the recipes for all the dishes that either of the 2 chefs cooked during the course of the book. Is like at the end of the chapters. If you read this book, even if you don't like the story like I did, the food sounds really good, so you can cook some tasty food. Moving on into my 3-star reads, again I had 3 of them. Interesting. The first of which was Darkest Hour, which is the 4th book in the Mediator series by Meg Cabot. I remember this, again when I was younger, being the point where I started not liking the books as much, and I think that's still true, because the first 3 books are very much like sort of individual stories with the same characters, but you don't really need to follow what happens from one book to the next. And then book 4 is where it started having like this overarching story that would carry over in the last 3 books, so books 4, 5, and 6. And it's fine. Again, it's just Sue's like having ghost adventures, not affiliated with the TV show, and just like doing her thing. It's fun. She's very sassy. I'll give her that. Very sassy. Fun to read about. Just like very middle of the road. So there are quite a few smutty books in the rest of this video because I watched, again, Chelsea Dawling. She influences basically everything I do. I watched her Smuttathon TBR, and one of the books that she talked about really piqued my interest, so I read that one, and then that kind of led me to read like a few more. So this next book that I'm talking about is one of the books that I read because of her, and that is Dirty First Dates, Halloween Haunt by Harley LaRue. So it was like a super short, like maybe 40 pages, just like quick little smutty thing. All of her books have trigger warnings in the descriptions on Goodreads and Amazon, so I really enjoy that a lot. Thank you, Harley, for doing that. So this follows this girl who is going on this first date with this guy, and they're at this like Halloween carnival thing. So there's a bunch of different haunted house mazes, and they kind of run off and do their own like sexy thing during this Halloween thing. So it was kind of fun to read about, you know, just a fun time. My final 3-star read was This Is Not the Jess Show by Anna Carey. This follows this girl named Jess who lives the perfect life. You know, she's just a normal teenager. She's kind of popular. There's cute boys at her school like she has feelings for. Until one day, she sees this little rectangular thing fall out of her best friend's backpack, and it has the symbol of an apple with a bite taken out of it. But it's the 1990s. Microsoft won't really come out as a company, and Apple won't be a thing for another few years. So then Jess is trying to figure out what this conspiracy is that people are hiding from her, because people act like she never saw it. Her dog disappears, like all these things happen, and Jess is trying to solve this mystery of what's going on. It's very Truman Show-esque, if that gives you any idea of what this book is about. Moving on into my 4-star reads, I had 2 of them. They are both smut books. Let Me Live My Life. So the first one is the book that Chelsea Dawling was talking about that kind of piqued my interest and had me kind of go on like a smut spree, which is The Dare, also by Harley LaRue. Also, I really love this book cover. I don't know why I like it so much, but it's really cool. So this book follows this popular mean girl, maybe also named Jessica, I don't actually remember. It follows this popular mean girl who is at this Halloween party. It's kind of like a reunion from high school. They're all in college now, or most of them are. And she kind of bumps into this guy who she and her friends like kind of bullied, and he was kind of made fun of in high school, and everybody likes him now. Like, he's cool, I guess. And they kind of play truth or dare, and more of the dares turn sexy, and then really sexy, and then like kind of borderline embarrassing. And she ends up spending the rest of the night hanging out with him. Again, read the trigger warnings in the Goodreads description. If that general story premise sounds interesting to you, like, read the trigger warnings, make sure that it's something that you might be interested in. It's like very dirty. Like, the whole thing was basically sex, which is fine. It's not that long. Like, that's why people read these kinds of books. I'm not mad at it. But just if that's not what you're into, then don't read this book. But I really liked it a lot. It was super fun. And then my next 4-star read was Priceless by Miranda Silver. This is a book, again, like another sort of like taboo romance, where this girl in college is struggling to make ends meet, and this guy she met at a party a few months before offers to pay her to be his companion. So they will be exclusive, and they have a standing date where she goes to his room in the frat house, and they have sexy times. And that was very fun. I liked reading about it a lot. I liked both the sexy times, like those were fun. And then also like their emotional journeys, both of them, and how their relationship progressed. It felt very natural, and the timeline made a lot of sense to me. I really liked it a lot. So again, that's something that like might be a line for some people. I liked it. And if you're interested at all, like, check it out, see if that might be something you're interested in, because I thought it was pretty fun. And then moving on into my 5-star reads for April, I had 2 of them. They were both rereads. Not surprising. So the first of those was Sadie by Courtney Summers. That's the one audiobook I listened to because this book is perfect as an audiobook. I talked about it in my favorite books of 2019 video because it seriously is so excellent. It's about this girl named Sadie whose little sister was murdered, and then Sadie disappears. And the book is told in alternating chapters. Some of them are from Sadie's perspective, and then the other chapters are from this like true crime, very like NPR serial type podcast following her disappearance. So the audiobook is incredible. It's a full cast. The chapters about the podcast like literally sounds like a podcast. Like, they have the intro music, they have background noises, it's so good. It's difficult to read about because there is obviously like Sadie's sister was murdered, so murder. There's sexual assault and pedophilia, not described on the page, but you know that it's like talked about, it's in there. So if that's something that will bother you, don't read it. But if you can handle that kind of stuff, I highly recommend you read this book because it like gets you in the heart. I don't want to say it's like good because it's like not like good that the things happen, but the way the story is portrayed is so excellent. And then the final 5-star read of April was Red, White, and Royal Blue by Casey McQuiston. Are you guys tired of seeing this on my channel yet? This is the 4th time I've read it since July. I've read it 4 times in like 9 months. This is who I am as a person. Sorry, not sorry. If you're unaware, this book is about Alex. He's the first son of the United States. And Henry, he is the youngest prince of England. And they hate each other. Except then, due to the 2 of them making fools of themselves at a wedding, they have to pretend to be friends, and then they actually become friends, and then they actually become something more. If you can't tell by like this very pink ass book, it's a romance book. It's perfect, rivals to lovers, hate to love, whatever you want to call it. It's so good. I wasn't sure if reading this book again would make me feel better or worse, because we are currently living in the red, white, and royal blue timeline, and the way real life is going is just like so far off the path of the ideal world of this book. It's just bonkers, and I wasn't sure if this book would make me feel more depressed about current situations or less. But this book made me feel hopeful, just like it always does. And I really enjoyed reading it, and honestly, I might read it again really soon. You might see it in like my May wrap up too. We'll see. 5 stars, as always. Not a surprise. All right, that's it. That is my big, massive 3-month wrap up. I hope not to have to do this again. I hope to be able to create content regularly and have it ready for you guys. That was a lot of talking. If you've read any of these books, please let me know what you think. If you have recommendations for what I should be reading, take a look at my entire physical TBR video, which I posted a couple weeks ago. Check that out. Tell me what to read next. I need some recommendations. I'm feeling kind of uninspired with my current TBR, but I know I need to be reading those books. I spent money on them. That's why I have them. I need to read them. So leave a comment, like and subscribe. That's what YouTubers say. See you guys next time.